Hello and good evening to everyone joining in from India and good afternoon to those joining us from France today. I'm Aditya. I'm an associate fellow here at the Takshashila institution. And I'm very pleased today to welcome all of you to this discussion on how India and France are collaborating in space and how that partnership can be expanded. We have an amazing panel today, three professionals who actually work in the space sector. We have Mathieu from the French Space Agency. Mathieu is also a counselor space at the Embassy of France in India. And he has deep experience working in this country in the space sector, and he knows the sector like very few others do. We also have Rao, who is the CMD of Centum, which is an enterprise with ambitions of its own in the space sector. Under Rao, Centum has grown to be a global electronics design and manufacturing company. It has operations in India, in France, in Canada, and the WEF called it a global growth company. Rao himself has been recipient of numerous awards and honors for his achievements. And I will just add that he's also a Ford Foundation scholar and is on the board of several companies, both public and private. And finally, we have Susmita Mohanty. If you track the space sector in India, you've almost certainly heard of her or seen her speak at least. She's a space entrepreneur who started companies on 3 continents, and she's now CEO of Earth to Orbit. And she is one of those people out there who's been involved in all aspects of the space sector, not just the commercial and the scientific, but also when it comes to things like communication and education. She was herself educated in both India and France, and she went to International Space University in France. And so she understands the cooperation between the two countries very intimately. Now, before we get to our panel, I just want to say a word about Takshashila. Takshashila is an independent Center for Research in Education and Public Policy. We're an independent, non-partisan think tank, and we are concerned with how India shapes the world and also how the world shapes India in turn. Takshashila is focused on transforming how India is governed and exploring the intersection of technology, economics, and politics. Obviously, these are all subjects that we're going to touch upon in today's discussion. So without further ado, I want to welcome our panelists. Thank you all for joining us. I want to start today's discussion with a fairly broad-based question to all of you, which is simply, a lot of people joining us today will really wonder, why does India-France space cooperation matter? I don't know how many people would know that, this relationship has its roots going back to the 1960s, some 6 decades, that India and France have been cooperating really right from the very beginning. Just yesterday, we're recording this on the 16th of April, just yesterday, India and France inked a deal on cooperating on the Gaganyaan mission, which is India's human space flight mission. So this is a relationship with deep roots and has actually been growing in strength. It's also a relationship that has been built on personal connections over the years between people. Mathieu, for instance, would know about this very well. And I want to start with you, Mathieu. What is the rationale for India and France to cooperate on space? What does France bring to the table and what does India bring to the table? Are those strengths complementary? And what can they achieve together?
Thank you, Aditya. Well, I would like to say, first, this is something that has been there for 60 years. And in a continuous way, it has never been interrupted. There is probably no other model of space cooperation in the world that you can find that will have these exceptional characteristics. And very few people are aware of it. So it is a chance that we have, both of us, France and India, because it is a shared relationship. We learn from each other. It's not a one-way relationship, it's a two-way relationship. So why did it happen? I think you're very right in saying that it's very based on human relations. It has always been friendship, trust, fraternity, so brotherhood. People have helped each other, and all over the years. I won't go through all the different projects we've had, but we have developed rocket engines, we've developed joint satellites, we have now we are doing manned space. We have touched upon almost every topic of space activity over these 60 years. Now, what is the background? I would like to say, if you want to simplify all this, you would maybe say there is a wish of independence in both countries that has driven these countries, specifically these two countries, to join their forces in space. Because, you know, we've had very strong actors like the US, Russia, and now China. But France and India, if they join, if they work together, they become a real game changer in this panorama. And in the same time, they want to keep this independence. This is a very strong exception that you have here in India, as you know, and now more than ever, and we can talk about this since I'm here since almost 10 years, so I have seen the evolution. And we have the same wish of independence, which is in our veins in France. And I think this matter of independence is at the very bottom, at the very foundation of the success we have had in space during 60 years.
Great. That's good to know. I mean, it's obvious that this is built, like you said, on deep personal connections. That's really part of how the relationship has been institutionalized. Mr. Rao, I want to turn to you and ask you, Centum Group has been heavily involved in the space sector now. In 2019, in fact, you set up a facility for design and making of electronic modules and various systems and subsystems for both satellites and for launch vehicles. So my question to you is, how has this collaboration between India and France impacted you as a private sector company?
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. We've been in the space business for about 20 years now. It started in a small way. It started with, of course, ISRO, right? And we've grown over time. And I must, first of all, acknowledge the support and the tremendous amount of time and money that they have spent, not only on us, to develop the ecosystem in India for the space companies. As you know, there's only one customer in India as of now, which is ISRO, but that is going to be changing very soon. And so we've sort of worked with them, and we've moved from being we started with hybrid microcircuits, an electronic component, but now we actually make a complete payload, for example. So it's been a great journey. It's been a lovely journey and a great learning process. Now, coming to the association between us and France, we went and acquired a company some years ago in France. It's a fairly large company, and it's a pure design services company. And one thing I must tell you is, we always think about things coming in from France to India in a high-tech type of situation. But the company that we bought was in defense and aerospace, but they were not in space. And I must tell you, in the last 4 years, we've actually been able to take some of our technologies that we've developed here in India and take it into France. And now we have, for example, we are designing products for large companies like Thales Alenia from the knowledge and the competencies that we have in India from India. So it's been a great association, and we are only seeing that it's increasing. Now, of course, what we do currently is basically the design aspect. Now we're talking in terms of actually getting into manufacturing also, as co-develop a few products with some of the large space companies in France. So that's been a great experience. We're learning, obviously, every day. And till very recently, for 15 years, we had one customer, which is ISRO. But in the last few years, we are trying to spread and go outside of the country. And France has been very welcoming. And like Mathieu said, I think there is this deep need to be self-sufficient and work together, just so that we are independent and we have the ability to develop newer and more innovative products going forward.
Great. I want to ask you a very quick follow-up question, which is how is it different? How is it different, say, doing business in France in the space sector? Are there specific advantages to it? You talked about the spirit of independence, but is there something more?
I think space is a difficult business, I must say, right? So let's not underestimate the difficulty of entering the market. Because once you do something and it goes up in this into the space, there's not much you can do. You can't fix it. So obviously, the rigor to become a supplier or a partner is going to be quite I wouldn't call it difficult as much as it is very. One needs to be very diligent, and one needs to have the right competencies. So you need patience. And if you don't have patience, then I think it's going to be difficult. That's lesson number one. Number two, the good news is that's the difficult news, right? But the good news is that once you're in, obviously the scale of business in France is much bigger than it is in India. That's number two. So once you're in, your ability to scale is much better. Number three, which I think is a commercial issue, but in India, it's always L1, whoever is the lowest, whether he's really capable, not capable, or whether he's giving a product which is, top of the line. Money becomes very important. Are you the lowest but that, of course, you have to be competitive. Nobody is going to give you business unless you're competitive. But they look at your capabilities, your abilities, your competencies, your past experience, and then you are able to. So it's not just based on one parameter; it's based on multiple, and that's also very helpful in terms of scaling the business. So this is what I'd say.
Thank you. That's actually very interesting. Susmita, I want to get you in here. You're a tech entrepreneur. You've been educated in both countries. You've worked on several continents. I want to ask you the same question. India has fruitful space cooperation with other countries, most notably the US and Russia, at least at the state level. What, in your mind, makes the relationship with France stand out? What makes it distinctive?
She's muted.
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'd like to clarify to the audience, Aditya, before I respond to your question, that while it is true that I am a tech entrepreneur, it is not in the strictest sense of the word, because I straddle the worlds of art, architecture, science, technology, and business, because I have a very, very multidisciplinary background. And unlike hardcore tech entrepreneurs, I've not limited myself to tech alone. Just to give you a very quick sort of a rainbow overview, one of my alma maters was NID, and one of the frequent visitors to NID used to be, back in the day, in the 60s and 70s, a very famous French photographer called Henri Cartier-Bresson. And one of my favorite photographs of ISRO from the early 60s of an experimental rocket launch is these two guys carrying a rocket cone of a sounding rocket on a bicycle, with coconut plantations in the foreground. And that's a photograph by Henri himself. Henri was married to, I believe, a Javanese dancer. I'm trying to put a cultural canvas to the Indo-French relationship, because I think that is a distinct marker. That is what differentiates our cooperation with France as compared to, say, any other country like the United States. In fact, US and India had several bottlenecks, which have slowly eased over the years, in recent years. But I think the French cooperation is not only 50 years old, it's 5 decades old. It's also, unlike, I work with the Americans very closely, with the International Space Station program, with the Shuttle Meet program, I've worked with several European countries and the Japanese as well. In many cases, you find that international cooperation is based on strategic interests. But I think in the case of India and France, it comes from the heart. Now imagine this, okay, a couple of years ago, Professor Jacques Blamont, who was one of the founding fathers of the French space program, a very good friend of Sarabhai, he came to visit me in my office, in my little office in Bangalore. And just imagine if Sarabhai would have been alive in his 90s and he goes and meets, young entrepreneurs in France. I mean, that's the level of friendship, right? That's the level of exchange. It's not just based on strategic interest. And I think I'll give you one other example. So on one hand, a company like mine, Earth to Orbit, in the initial 7 years when we were opening up the launch market for India, in the US particularly, which was closed because of a US embargo of 1998, which still exists, I was also focusing on Japan. I wanted to bring Japan to launch on the PSLV. So my first launch as an entrepreneur in India was a piggyback with Spot 6. So Spot 6 is part of the French series of Earth observation satellites, which some of you in the audience must know about. So the Japanese client that we launched wrote piggyback on Spot 6, and that for me was a matter of great pleasure, because here there was champagne and there was sake, and we were celebrating a launch, together. I'll give you another example, our collaboration with a company called Climate City in France. So Climate City was created after the Paris Declaration, where $100 billion were set aside for investing in companies in developing countries to embark on projects where climate change can be addressed. So that's what brought Climate City and Earth to Orbit together, which I think is a very, very contemporary, topic that we are addressing by leveraging our space assets, right? And the satellites that ISRO has built in collaboration with CNES, if you look at Megatropics, which is looking at the water cycle in the context of the tropical environment, you look at Saral, I think it's not just important as partners, but I think the kind of missions we choose are also, in my view, quite glamorous in a nice way, very exciting missions, not boring missions where it's not boring tech, it's exciting tech, let's put it that way. One other example I'll give you of cooperation. In 2015, I brought a French choreographer called Kitsu Dubois, who lives in Reims outside of Paris. She was in her 60s. I invited Kitsu Dubois to India, to Delhi, and we organized an underwater movement workshop. Now, those of you out there in the tech world must be wondering, why is a tech entrepreneur bringing a choreographer? So here is Kitsu's background. I think Kitsu, as a dancer, more as a choreographer, she has done fascinating experiments in parabolic flights. So, you take a plane and you fly it in a series of parabolas, and at the top of the parabola, there is free fall. So you can float free for about 20-25 seconds. And that's the time where you can test flight hardware, where you have even artists like Kitsu experimenting. So she has researched movement in microgravity environments in very interesting ways, not only on parabolic flights, but underwater with circus acrobats. So I brought her to India to collaborate with young contemporary dancers in Delhi. So my relationship with France, when it comes to collaboration in the space realm, goes beyond tech, right? It includes the arts as well, the humanities as well. So I think I really want the audience to look at Indo-French cooperation in the broadest manner possible. So stretch your imagination, guys. And my relationship with France is almost a quarter of a century old now. I first went to France in '96 to study in Strasbourg. So again, I think broaden the canvas, yeah? Stretch your minds, guys. So I think the Indo-French space cooperation is at multiple levels. And Mathieu, I'm really excited about the new agreement which was signed for Gaganyaan. I had a French intern called Pierre Bertrand he was studying at MIT doing a dual degree. He came to intern with us at Earth to Orbit. He's recently applied to the European Astronaut Corps. And here we are signing a Gaganyaan cooperation agreement. Really excited about that. By the way, Aditya, I think I should also clarify that my specialty is really in the area of human space exploration, which is why I'm very excited about the Gaganyaan cooperation agreement.
Yeah, great to know. I want to get to that. We will get to human space exploration a little later. My next round of questions really to all three of you is, we've set the stage nicely for the rationale for why this relationship exists and what makes it tick. What I want to ask now is what the future holds. Last year in 2020, India made some fairly far-reaching regulatory changes to its space sector that are meant to promote India's own commercial space industry. So my first question here to all three of you is, what can India learn from the French example in terms of promoting the space sector? And the second part to this question is really, what specific steps would you like to see both India and France take to deepen their cooperation in ways that benefit both countries? I'll start with you, Mathieu.
Thank you, Aditya. I think you said you want to look at what India can learn from France. I want to turn it the other way around, what France can learn from India.
Great.
And why do I say that? I arrived here when India was a medium-sized player in space globally. Chandrayaan-1 had just happened. We had 2 French Indian satellites in orbit, Megatropics and Saralaltika. INSAT was at the time the reference. And so India was fine. India was a big player. And this is why we opened an office here in India. But look at what India has become in these 10 years. Now, India is a full space power today. I think no one can contradict this. India has become a full space power. We have had the Mars mission, of course, the Moon mission, we'll have Venus mission. But not only these demonstrations of force, that's not what makes a space power. What makes a space power is the independent navigation system, the GSAT series, high throughput satellites that have come up. We have now GSLV in India, cryogenic technology, GSLV Mark III, which is a heavy launch vehicle. Cooperation manifold with lots of countries. You have the SSLV coming up, small launch vehicle. You have space surveillance, which has come up for the security of our assets. So what I want to say is that this is a totally different India where we are now than when I arrived here. So that we have to acknowledge that. And in the meantime, in the same time, the world has totally changed. The space world has totally changed. This was the time when new space came up, when the revolution in space happened. So what happened? It was a revolution in the Western space. And what was the revolution in the Western space? I will recall it in a few words. Simplification of technologies first, because in the West, we were used to build Formula Ones. Very complicated things. So the trend now is to simplify. India has always made simple things. Never, no Formula One, okay? Optimization of procedures in the West. And why is that? Because the US has brought in so many procedures at a certain moment of time. India did never take it. We took them, and we have to backdraw to take them away now to make things simple. What did SpaceX do? They simplified the procedures. That's the main thing they did. So India has never had these procedures. They never accepted them. Third thing, short calendars, make things faster. What is India doing today? A Mars mission in 18 months. we take 10 years. Okay? Applications, orientation for applications and services. So the West said, now we need to do applications. This is very important. We need space services because there is the money. What did Vikram Sarabhai say in the 60s? That application and services are the only way in which you have to do space, because this is where space is important. So what do I want to say? I want to tell you that all the seeds of what the West discovered 5 years ago, you have these seeds in India since 60 years. You have to know that. Everything is here. So now, why is India not a big player in commercial space worldwide? This is the question we have to ask ourselves. What can we do today to use these seeds that are here in India and to nourish them in order to build, let me take some image that everyone will understand, the SpaceX of satellites. Because we need SpaceX of satellites. We have all pieces of the puzzle to do that. When I say we, I mean the French industry plus Indian industry. And I think Rao may give his opinion on this because he is heading one of these companies in India, which are at the forefront of international standard here in India. When you visit Rao's company, you understand that there is no difference in working between what is done in Centum and what is done back in Europe in a European space industry. So it is very easy to cooperate with such kind of players. And there is a whole set of players like Centum in India. Now the time has come, and maybe others, our Indian friends are in a better position to explain, but the time has come now because this is the momentum. It has opened up, the Indian government has opened up for Indian industry to take new steps in production of satellites, production of launch vehicles. So why don't we bring our industries together today? Because this is the right time to take over the whole thing and to use the seeds that are there in India to build competitiveness for both our countries worldwide.
Thanks. That's a great insight, and it's really refreshing to see you point out how India can, how France in turn can learn from India. Mr. Rao, I want to turn to you as someone who does business in both countries. What is it that, let's say, both countries can learn from each other in the space sector?
Okay, so like I said, typically the ecosystem develops based on the customers that you have. And by and large, most Indian companies, or all Indian companies, I'd say, the customer was ISRO. So you really did what ISRO wanted us to do. You developed the technologies, you developed the manufacturing capabilities, all of these things based on what the customer wants. And if you see ISRO, the satellites that they've developed are of a certain size, and whereas and of course their applications were required that size. But if you see what's happening in the world, there's the new small satellites that are being launched, whether it's SpaceX or Telesat or OneWeb now. It's a completely different ballgame. And so the applications and the usage that we can use in India, which is the small satellites, that capability we really don't have. What we do have is the basic competencies, the infrastructure. We have what is basically required to build these things. But we have never built small satellites in India because there was no need for it, right? Because there was no customer. But now one of the best things that the government did last year was to open up the space economy. And I think it's one of the finest things that happened to the space industry in India in a long, long time. So now, personally, if you ask me, what would I think we should do? I think and like what Matthew is saying, I think if you go and see what companies are doing on small satellites, it's almost like it's a car manufacturing facility. Satellites keep coming out. It's a production line. Unlike you make 5 satellites or 10 satellites a year, you're making hundreds now. So the complete methodology is different, number one. Number two, while it is small satellite, the cost is a very, very important factor. You have to take cost out, and it's very competitive. I must tell you this. I mean, we bid on some of these projects, and if you look at the big satellites, the way that we build subsystems or systems for them, vis-a-vis what is expected out of small satellites, is very, very different. So I believe, India is clearly very good in design. I mean, everybody knows that, or redesign, whatever is required, number one. Number two, again, in terms of manufacturing, and I think Matthew alluded to that also, the infrastructure, not just in our company, I think Matthew was very kind, but there are lots of companies in India in the space business where exactly what Matthew said applies, which is their processes, their infrastructure is exactly the same as anywhere else in the world. And so we believe that we should work with French companies who are in the small satellite business, right? And work with them to actually bring that technology and those applications to India. And I think there is a humongous requirement. And again, there's lots of very fine startups with great ideas, and they're very, very innovative. Sometimes I wish I was probably 35 years younger when you see all these youngsters with these fabulous ideas. And I think there is potential in terms of the usage of the small satellites, because there's just so much going on. And what we definitely need is the ability to work with the French companies. And if we can come together with them, whether it's a very large corporation or whether it is a mid-sized French company, there are companies at different levels making small satellites. So I think coming together of companies between France and India to redesign, to be able to manufacture and actually go out and conquer the world markets. And we are very competitive. There's no question about that. So that's my feeling. I think we should focus on small satellite because that's where the volume is. That's where the numbers are. I mean, if you look at, I think SpaceX, they're talking what, 1,200 satellites, or you talk about OneWeb, they're talking 650 satellites. So all these constellations actually bring a tremendous amount of, so the point is that I would focus on small satellite business to actually scale the business and also provide the right infrastructure for the downstream applications from these small satellites. That's my take.
Oh, thanks. All right. I want to I just want to tell you all that I'm having problems with my internet connection, so I've turned off my video so that hopefully you all can still hear me. So apologies for that. But thank you so much, sir. And I'm sure the audience will also have more follow-up questions for all of you. A quick word to our audience: please type in your questions in the Q&A box. We'd love to hear more from you. Susmita, I want to ask you the same question. Who should learn from whom? France, India? Who should, or do both countries learn from each other?
I think we have, both of us can learn from each other. I like the point that Matthew made up front where he said that we could pull off a Mars mission in, around 14 to 18 months from the day a budget is approved. where typically in Western countries, it would take 7 to 10 years to accomplish the same thing. So I think innovation not only has to happen in products and services, but also in organizational structures and hierarchies and how you can improvise and respond to a situation. But let's talk a little bit about the Indian private industry. So I grew up with the pioneers of the Indian space program in the 70s and 80s. And my dad's generation, who were among the first recruits of Sarabhai in the late 60s, I remember them going to small and medium enterprises and convincing people that they should build certain components, certain subsystems so that they could, so that ISRO could become as independent technologically as possible in the years to come. And it was a very long, drawn out affair. And I remember when I returned to India in 2008, after having lived in 3-4 different countries and worked in their space programs, I visited Godrej and Vikhroli, I visited Tata Advanced Materials and so on to look at their facilities and to have conversations. And I realized that even in 2008, which is about 12 years ago, I think that's when Mathieu also arrived in India, if I'm not mistaken. I got the sense that these big companies were still doing all this as service to the nation. There was no profit whatsoever. It was more of a social enterprise, right? And from 2008, fast forward to 2021, and I think a lot has changed for the better, if you ask me. In the last 12 years, Aditya, I have visited Delhi on so many occasions, entirely on my own initiative. I've met ministers, I've met bureaucrats. It's been a long conversation back and forth as to why India needs to privatize, deregulate, and commercialize. Because in my view, the kind of importance we have given to the IT sector, right, where we've really brought down all barriers, and we say here is a multi-billion-dollar sector for India. The reality is there's very little innovation in the IT sector, to be honest. It's largely based on outsourcing, right, of back officers. But if you look at the space sector, on the other hand, these are the kind of conversations I've had with ministers and bureaucrats over the last, a decade or so on occasional trips to Delhi. We in India have done amazing things in the space sector, right? We are talking about small satellites as an opportunity, as a big business opportunity for young companies. But the reality is, one, that India took, in my view, 10 years too long to start the privatization process. Why is ISRO doing routine satellite building, assembly, or even the PSLV rocket, which is a very, very reliable, mature rocket? Why is ISRO assembling and launching it? Why did they not hand it over to the industry already, right? So while I'm very excited about the slowly opening up of the space sector, we need to see more from the government. The thing we can learn from the Western world, from the French, from the Americans, and others is, look, Arianespace is a company from the 80s, right? So our government, and especially ISRO, needs to have more confidence in our young people, in their tech capabilities, for example. The very first private contract that ISRO gave out to a consortium in 2016, the way it is designed, in my view, is such that this consortium needs to show up at ISRO and do everything under their very noses, under their supervision. So let us, I also have a company in Vienna, in Austria, which is now 17 years old. So the way you give contracts to consortia is you also give them independence. You give them enough money to set up their own clean room facilities. You let them do their thing, they can do it. So I think India has a problem of behaving like overprotective parents. We need to step back, right? Look at India. We have about 24 amazing space startups in India. They are making everything from green propulsion, cutting edge stuff, guys, to single walled carbon nanotubes, some of the finest in the world. And here is ISRO saying, we don't trust you enough. We're not going to step back and let you do your thing. I think that confidence, I see that in the West. I've lived abroad for almost 14 years, and we need that confidence in India to say, yes, our young people can do it. Let's give them a contract, let them play. So I is something we need to learn from the Western world. And the way we improvise, the frugal engineering that we do, all that is very good. I also tell young people that, guys, frugal engineering is good, but frugal thinking is not, right? So if you have the resources, don't design a satellite which is not, so all I'm saying is build top-notch products, no shortcuts, no jugaad, find the resources, right? Even our remote sensing satellites, if you look at them, there are a lot of embargoes. By the way, the world of space that everybody knows out there are a lot of export control regimes which slow things down. So despite that, India has done extremely well. But I think we need to go a little forward, like both in terms of upping our game. So let's not be very pleased with ourselves, guys. And I'm very excited about the fact that today companies are able to raise 3 million, 5 million US dollars from private sources, which is not very easy, I would say, in Europe, for example. It's happening, but it's tough. In Europe, a lot of the young entrepreneurs often depend on state funds. You have something called the Horizon 2020 program, which is run by the European Commission, which is an amazing funding ecosystem where, as a young company, young consortia, mixed consortia, you can get up to 3 million, 4 million euros for a complete demonstration of whatever technology you're building, which in India, there are no state funds, right? So that is the other thing I've been championing, advocating, pushing for with the Indian government. That let's say NASA in 2020 gave $50 million to 250 companies, small companies across the United States. Why can't ISRO give 5 million to, say, 10 companies in India? So I think we need to be more generous. We need to be more confident. We need to be bolder, and we need to up our game. And we need to keep our slogans down and up the funding. So I think we have a long way to go.
So generous, more bold, more confident. Yeah, I think that is sound advice for India. Is there something specific that we can learn from France or even the broader European example on space privatization, encouraging space industry? My colleague Pranay is asking, not just what went well in those examples, Susmita, but also what went wrong. What are the things that those countries haven't done as well that India can do?
I can give you an example in human space exploration. So India very soon will have its own crew capsule, right, which can ferry a crew of 3 astronauts to space and back to low Earth orbit. And when I arrived in India in 2008, they'd already started working on that. So India has been working on the human space program for more than 10 years now. And France had a similar program called Hermes back in the 90s, I believe. Mathieu, correct me if I'm wrong, which was a very exciting program. Again, a human ferry to take astronauts to the low Earth orbit outpost. And it did not see the light of day. In my view, France and some of the other European players get bogged down by consensus. See, I love the European Union the way it is, but there are pros and cons. And when I look at the European Space Agency, for example, which is a conglomerate of 20 plus European member states, and I'm very familiar because I worked with them, I think consensus is good, but consensus can also be a problem. So in my view, the fact that Europe, and in particular a country like France, which is a leading player in Europe, doesn't have a human ferry even today, is because there are certain other bottlenecks. Whereas in India, we'll have a crew vehicle, in the next years. So this is a very good example of how India can do things independently and in a pragmatic fashion. So if India were to be in the same boat with, say, the United States, there are certain conditions to that relationship or to that cooperation, and you can't do certain things. But India has chosen to be independent, and I think that works in India's favor. And this is a real life example I can give you.
Yeah, thanks. That actually makes sense. Mr. Rao, I'll ask you the same question. You've done business in France. You do business in France. How is the regulatory environment there different in some crucial ways that we can learn from?
I hope you're not asking about the space in particular, because that's an answer I can't give. But
okay,
I must tell you on regulatory, first of all, I think it's easier than it is in India. There's no doubt. And I'll give you one or two examples for that. You know, when we went and acquired this company in 2016, it's a company that does business with defense and space and aerospace, transportation, and they do work with Airbus, Thales, and all these defense companies. And obviously, they do a lot of work which is very proprietary. And so when we wanted to buy it, obviously there are permissions and so on that we have to get from the government. And it was it was quite stringent in terms of the process that we had to go through, including when we made the application to the Economic Affairs Ministry. They would go down to the customer, whether it's a Thales or an Alstom, and say, do you have any objection if this company, the ownership changes to an Indian company, right? So in terms of process, it was quite rigorous. But I must tell you this, within 4 months after we made that application, of course, we had enough phone calls going back and forth or some emails, but I didn't have to make one stop at any of the government offices in France, none. And 4 months later, we got the permission. And of course, you had some conditions, which is fine. But in terms of, and that was most impressive as far as I'm concerned. So in terms of regulatory, the second thing is, if you look at the COVID times, the other thing that happened, obviously, this is an engineering services business, which means people. And when you have a lockdown, you have issues. So immediately, of course, for strategic companies, and we are strategic, and the government said, we have to make sure these companies are taken care of. And for people who were unemployed for that period of time, the government paid 85% of all their salaries. That's number one. Number two, you know, they also don't want the supply chain to suffer, right? Or our investments to slow down. So they actually gave the government gave counter guarantees to the banks to give us loans at 2% interest rate with a moratorium of 2 years or something like that. So in terms of the support that you would get from the government in times of need, and I don't think it's fair to compare India with France. I think it's a wrong thing to do because our situations are different. But I'm just highlighting the good part, which I think is something that we sort of really enjoyed and still enjoy in terms of the processes that they have. They're rigorous. Don't think they don't have a process and it's very simple. It's not very simple. You have to go through multiple steps. You have to go through multiple departments, including, like I said, it goes down to the customer. If the customer says, no, we don't want this company to be sold, I wonder what would have happened. Luckily, nobody said that. So to me, I think the regulations, while they are rigorous, I think time is something that is kept in mind, and decisions come fast. What we can't afford in a business situation is you're hanging in there for months and months and maybe years, and you don't get an answer. Even a no is fine, but you need an answer. So, and I think that's really what I really appreciate about the French system of governance and administration.
Thanks. Yeah.
Aditya, if I might add, I think Rao made a very good point. I often get asked about bureaucracy in India. And I tell them that my experience in the United States and my experience in Europe has shown me that there is bureaucracy everywhere, but the end of the bureaucratic process, whether it takes 2 years, 4 years, or 5, there is an outcome, there's a result. In India, I'm hoping things are going to change, but often at the end of that bureaucratic process, you end up with, still a question mark. And I think, so what I'm trying to say is entrepreneurs out there have to remember that they have to deal with bureaucracy no matter which geography they are in. And they have to find antidotes to the bureaucracy. But in India, we need some outcomes in the end, you know. And I'm hoping that will change now that we are seriously thinking of opening up the space sector.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that's something we're all hoping for. We're all advocating as well. Mathieu, how, I don't know how much you can speak to this, but what is it that you think immediately that India can learn from France? Yeah.
I want to come up with an example.
Sure.
Our government wanted to have a French competency in building small satellites. Apparao mentioned that it is in the center of business today. And we didn't have this capacity in France to build nano satellites. So what has been done is that CNES worked on requirements for the best nano satellites in the world. So first, we selected the best requirements to be on top. Second, we set up a call and we injected money into the system. That means that we ordered a constellation of nanosatellites. So 25, 30 nanosatellites that were, open to the call for French industry to step in. And what was obvious happened. It was not the big players who won this call. It was a medium-sized company, which was a supplier to CNES for years already, who won the call because they were best, I would say they had the best tools, they had the best seeds, as I was telling before. They had everything to build up, to ramp up, and to become this player. They had the agility also because they were smaller. They had the possibility to work in a startup way of work, but it was not a startup. It is a company that was 30 years old, but that was a supplier. And they ramped up and they became Hemeria today, which is building nanosatellites for the French government, of course, because this is what they have been hired for. But they will sell their nanosatellites all over the world tomorrow and in the years to come. So that is what the example I want to give. This is what India needs. India does not only need regulation. India needs a big contract. And when I say a big contract, it doesn't need to be very big, but it needs some incentive for these companies. And Rao mentioned it. You need, if you want to ramp up and build a whole factory to produce nanosatellites, you need to have a contract for this. And the international customer will not be the first coming in and saying, Rao, please build 300 satellites for me. That's not the way it works. So the Indian government could easily open a call, give some money, and say, here is an opportunity for you guys to ramp up and become a satellite builder in India. And when I say this, I think not only at ISRO and civilian space, I think at military space. And why? Because the huge market in the future is in military space. We have both made huge reforms in France and in India. In France, we have created a space command. In India, you have created a military space agency. This is where the big capacity ramp up in the future lies. So it's just a suggestion, but why not use this for helping Indian industry to make this step that Rao is talking about, and to bring in the startups that Susmita is talking about, to accompany the whole process, because the startups will bring innovation, they will bring the fresh blood, they will bring the ideas, but the startups are the future for in 10 years. So now, if we want to go fast, We need to base on industry that is already ready and has the capacities today. And this industry has to back and to work with the startups together. That is the feeling, that is how we do. I would say, I'm not the kind of guy that says copy what we do, because I don't believe in that. You India have so much advantages that you should not copy us. That's one thing. But in this particular thing, I think we did right. And we have exceptional success. The constellation called Kineis is the best in the world in maritime surveillance, Internet of Things. It will make, a whole game changer in applications and services for the people, and not only for the French people.
Can I ride on this conversation?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead. So I think that's a very important point that Mathieu is making, that the Indian government, whether it is ISRO, whether it's Department of Defense as in DRDO, or it is the new Defense Space Agency that we are setting up, we as in the state, I'm not talking about we as in the state should be the first one to invest crores of rupees into each of these innovative technologies that the startups are putting out. And it's the same thing in the United States. Let us not forget that even Elon Musk, between his three companies, he has received $4.9 billion in state grants alone. That is not a small amount. So I think for Indian companies to go out and compete internationally, that is step 2. But step 1 is let us give them the magnitude of projects. That's why I'm saying be bold, be confident. Our kids, I'm saying kids because a lot of them are quite young. Some of them have started companies when they're 19. They are doing cutting edge stuff. So give them multi-crore contracts, and have your tendering process streamlined so that you can respond to a tender. The proposal is formatted in a way that it is easier for small companies to write them. And don't put them in the same bucket as the Tatas and the Mahindras and the bigger companies don't, because it's like, I will give you an anecdote. A friend of mine used to work for Surrey Space Technologies in the UK, and they were in a meeting with the European Space Agency where Surrey was taking on a small satellite project. So in the meeting, the kind of documentation that ESA was expecting of them, I'm not going to quote names, but I did quote names in terms of the organizations. So Surrey guys bluntly asked ESA, do you want the satellite or do you want the reports? So all I'm trying to say is the rules of the game should be different for the small companies. Yeah, so that they can deliver technology, give them big contracts, and then unleash them on the world to compete and win. Yeah. It can happen, but we need to support them.
Right. Yeah, I think you've both made a very good case for why we need really all sorts of companies in India working at the same time. And Mathieu, you made the very important point that the government really needs to create a market. It's not like the IT sector. We, as usual, we're almost out of time, and we have still a lot more things we'd like to discuss, but we'll have to stop soon. But I want to, Mathieu, squeeze in one quick audience question to you, if you can answer it in less than a minute. It's a very specific question. You talked about how military space is increasingly important. The question is, what can French industry offer India in terms of space situational awareness? And are there any specific subsystems or sensors that a French company has already perhaps supplied to ISTRAC, which is involved in the SSA?
We have started discussion with ISRO on space situational awareness, and that started a couple of years ago. Now it has intensified because ISRO has ramped up. ISRO is in a process, you may know about the NITRA program, which is the Indian program of space situational awareness that is in development. So we are very keen to work together with India in order to bring, to first exchange data. That's the first level. You absolutely need to exchange data. But then you need also to, you can develop joint sensors. Space situational awareness is a very specific business. So you need specific sensors. So there is a technology development that can be shared as well. But more than all the technicals, I would like to say the political level is of highest importance in space situational awareness, because you know that protecting our assets out there requires a very high level of trust between the two nations. And we have this high level of trust. We have a strategic dialogue between our two governments. We just need to implement under a section of this strategic dialogue and call it strategic military space dialogue or strategic space security dialogue.
Right.
And then we have it. You know, that's the point we need to do. That's not technical, it's diplomatic, but it will be extremely important in future. And our minister, you mentioned that the French foreign minister was in Bangalore yesterday, and he visited ISRO. And one of the things he said, he announced in his speech, is that he invited India to consider the possibility of to set up such kind of strategic dialogue in space security between the two nations. I think that is very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're completely out of time. We're over a minute late, and I'm sorry I couldn't take all audience questions. Thank you to all three of our panelists for this discussion on what some might assume to be a niche subject, but is actually super interesting. Thank you all for joining us. We will be having more events on many various aspects of the India-France relationship. Before we leave, I'll also like to tell people in our audience that applications for Takshashila's public policy programs are currently open. The deadline is the 25th of this month, and the programs begin on the 8th of May. So definitely check out Takshashila's website if you are at all interested in public policy, including technology policy like space. Thank you all so much once again.
Thank you. Thank you.